Please read Revelation chapter 12. The scene changes for John in chapter 12, and he sees what the Living Bible translates as a pageant. Other translations call it a portent or a harbinger. Another version translates it as a sign, and another a wonder. The implication is that this is different than what John has been seeing up to this point. The pageant opens up with a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and a garland of 12 stars on her head. She is pregnant and cries out in pain as she is about to give birth. This is generally accepted as a spiritual representation of Israel, and the 12 stars on her head represent the 12 tribes. The child represents Jesus, who was birthed out of the nation of Israel and came to earth as a baby. The pageant continues. There's a great red dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns on his head. These numbers will be significant as we continue reading. The dragon is symbolic of Satan. Typically, in a vision recorded in scripture, the heads and horns on a creature almost always represent earthly kings and kingdoms. And stars usually symbolize godly nations, people, and angels, as I mentioned before. Scripture tells us that Satan was responsible for a third of the angels rebelling against God and being cast down to earth. This is represented by the tail of the dragon sweeping a third of the stars out of the sky in John's vision. 1/3 doesn't sound like a lot until you consider an earlier supposition I made that the stars are angels. If when Satan rebelled, he took a third of all the stars in the galaxies at that time, that's a significant number of angels who rebelled. John says, and the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. The dragon, Satan, was ready to devour this child of Israel. Why? How did he know the significance of a child being born? He knew from the very beginning in the garden. Genesis chapter 3 says the serpent was the craftiest of all the animals God made. That wasn't a bad thing until he used his craftiness against his own creator, just like Satan did. And as a result, he got himself cursed. While God cursed the serpent for his act of deception, he was also sending his mentor, Satan, a message. From now on, you and the woman will be enemies, as will your offspring and hers. You will strike his heel, but he will crush your head. A child would cause Satan's demise. From that time on, though Satan probably gloated his victory of tricking God's man into handing over the keys of earth, he was also anxiously surveilling humankind, looking for any spiritual activity that surrounded a child, looking for any time that God's angels took particular interest. Pharaoh had newborn males thrown into the Nile River, perhaps because of the spiritual activity surrounding the birth of Moses. The evil King Herod killed all the children 2 years old and under after the wise men told him about the bright star, spiritual activity, shining over the newborn of Joseph and Mary. It's plausible that all throughout history, Satan has been wringing his hands, plotting and planning, God's ancient words still in his ears, trying to find this child who is going to destroy him so that he can destroy him first. Long story short, it didn't work, and he missed him. John sees this child caught up to God and to his throne. The woman flees to the wilderness, 1,260 days or 3.5 years, according to the Jewish calendar. After this child, Jesus, is taken up, a war breaks out in heaven between Satan's army and heaven's. This seems to indicate that Satan was not confined to earth or in hell before Jesus was born. The scriptures are not definitive on this, but there are several passages that indicate that Satan still had access to heaven and even made frequent use of it, taking the opportunity to accuse the brethren day and night before God's throne. But the Bible certainly makes no mention of hell being his domain or that he is in power there. In later chapters, Revelation will make it clear what roles hell will play for Satan. But this battle that John sees is specifically waged to kick Satan out of heaven. The freedom he enjoyed to come and go as he pleased was over. Before he had a right to be there, he had the deed, a deed he stole from Adam, but a legitimate right nonetheless to attend the board meetings of heaven and report on the status of his planet. However, Jesus got the deed back on behalf of humankind. The first Adam fell through his disobedience, but the second Adam succeeded through his obedience. And now Satan, who refused to go quietly, was permanently evicted from heaven. Michael and his angels basically said, "You ain't got to go home, but you got to leave here." Can you imagine heaven having to put up with Satan and his accusations against humankind day and night for ages? Poo-pooing on every good report? It was a good day in heaven and a bad day on earth, because that day, as Satan and his angels were kicked out, they came to earth angry and ready to retaliate. John sees the dragon go after Israel with a vengeance. Now, most people think after Jesus was crucified, it was God who went after Israel with a vengeance. However, this scripture is clear. Israel was on Satan's hit list, and so was everyone else who kept the commands of God.